Hi. All right. So this is an email from somebody, no idea who. Person writes, wanted to ask if you had any advice or could make a video about dependency / becoming dependent on another person during recovery. My boyfriend has been an amazing support throughout my recovery and I'm forever grateful, but when we aren't together I become a total wimp and I'm incapable of feeding myself. I think this is perhaps a big part of what caused my relapse over Christmas because I'm so used to his validation and him giving me permission to eat. I've definitely become totally dependent on him and can confidently say that all of my relapses are triggered by a period of us not being together. Obviously, this isn't a healthy relationship for anyone to have, whether it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, family member, etc., but I'm totally dependent on his support. I also find that if I'm hungry but he isn't there, then I totally refuse the idea of eating and only want to eat fear foods such as crisps, chocolate, etc. if he buys them and he eats them first. I hate it because I love him. My anorexia has found a way to sneak into our relationship, and now I get angry at things like if we buy Pringles and he doesn't eat more than me. I'm sure that there are some people who have experienced similar things, like perhaps people who become dependent on treatment clinics, but then can't recover when they relapse alone. Yeah, it's a thing. Definitely a thing. And you're not sustainable if you're dependent on someone else for your recovery. So in a sense, that means that if you think that you're recovering or you're recovered but you're dependent on someone else, it means that you're not really, because that's completely unsustainable. So recovery has to be sustainable. And that means that you have to be able to do it regardless of what your environment is. And so it's, I know you used the word wimp and it kind of is a bit like that. It's 100 times easier to eat something if someone else is there, consistently giving you permission to eat it. And basically, like helping you deal with the negative thoughts that are telling you you shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't eat this. So what happens is someone else is there and they sort of like do that work for you. That's not sustainable. You have to be able to do that work yourself. And that's neural rewiring as well. So you've got this tendency or this thing that says, I can't eat unless someone else gives me permission. You have to rewire that shit. And the only way that you're going to rewire that shit is when that thought comes up, when that thought of you're alone and you have that thought of I want to eat some food and then you have that, no, I can't even do that. In that moment, you have to teach your brain that that is not true by eating the fucking food. And so you're not doing the majority of the rewiring work if you're having to have somebody else do all of that for you. Like the rewiring work is the decision-making part. Rewiring happens when, say, you have a thought or a tendency or an emotional reaction, whatever it is, and in that moment in your head, you make the decision to counter that and to do the opposite of what that thought, that eating disorder thought wants you to do. And so if you think about it, if someone else is doing that for you, they're doing the work. You're not actually rewiring, because rewiring doesn't happen if someone else makes the decision for you and tells you, yes, it's okay for you to eat. Rewiring happens if you, in your head, tell yourself, I will eat and it's okay for me to eat. When you make that thought process, when you actively counter the negative thoughts that you're having or the tendency to not eat when you're alone, or if you actively counter that, in that moment when you made that decision to counter that thought, something happened in your brain. And that's what rewiring is. Like neural pathways started to change. And it doesn't work if someone else makes the decision for us. How our brains learn is by the process of making decisions and the process of doing things. And this is the reason that when you're in school, the teacher doesn't just give you the answer to the question. Say if you're in math, it used to really annoy me. In maths, when you're being tested and it says show you're working, and I'd just be like, why? Why do I have to? The reason that they ask you to do that, and the reason that the math teacher doesn't just give you the answers and ask you to work it out, is because that's where learning happens. When you sit there and you focus and you concentrate and you work something out in your head, that's when neural pathways get made. No one else can do that for you. If the math teacher sits there and works it out in their head, you didn't get any neural pathways made. And so if your boyfriend is sitting there saying, yes, it's okay for you to eat, you are not getting any neural rewiring done because you didn't make that decision. And I know it's so much fucking harder to make the decision, but that's the entire point, isn't it? That's why it's hard, because when you are forced to make that decision yourself, you have to counter those neural pathways that have been set up telling you that you can't do that sort of thing. That's why it's difficult. That's why it feels wrong, because you're going against something that your brain has been taught. And that's why it's important that you do it. And that's why it's completely unsustainable to be dependent on anybody else making decisions for you in recovery, because you are not doing neural rewiring. So, well, I guess you know what you've got to do. You've got to stop being a wimp, haven't you? Get on with it. You know what you've got to do. It's just, and it really is, sometimes it's like a tick. You'll want to open your mouth and you'll want to say, is it okay for me to eat this? And you've just got to make yourself shut the fuck up, not ask the question, and answer it yourself. Because you know the answer's yes. Like, you know the answer's yes. Don't pretend that you don't. Don't allow yourself to open your mouth and ask that question. Do not allow yourself to become dependent on someone else. Force yourself to answer that question yourself. And that is how you become sustainable. All right, gotta go. Bye.